Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. Bai Xiaochun looked at the trembling black shadow, and then pulled out a violet jade pendant and said, "Get over here." The shadow trembled again, then slowly floated over to Bai Xiaochun. Now that it was in front of him, he could just make out a face inside the black mist. With that, he reached out to grab it, only to find that his hand passed through the mist. Apparently, the gargoyle didn't actually have a physical body. Bai Xiaochun was now more intrigued than ever. The bloodstream sect's gargoyles and the spirit stream sect's evil ghosts are similar in some ways. Ghosts come from the souls of people who have died, but what about gargoyles? Where do they come from? After pondering the issue for some time, he couldn't come up with any theories. However, there seemed to be some connection between him and the gargoyle, something other than the jade plaque of control that had been given to him by Nameless Peak. Eventually, he came to the conclusion that the gargoyle must have something to do with the giant hand and the undying live forever technique. Even as Bai Xiaochun sat there and thought, the face in the mist suddenly twisted into a ferocious expression, and the mist pounced on Bai Xiaochun. Icy coldness spread out, a coldness filled with intense ferocity. It was almost as if it wanted to consume Bai Xiaochun's soul. The gargoyle's sudden outburst startled him so much that he unleashed the power of his cultivation base and flicked the thing. The gargoyle let out a miserable shriek, and the mist faded a bit. Having no other options, it hastily retreated to the corner where it remained, trembling. "What gall you have," Bai Xiaochun said angrily. Stomping forward, he aimed a kick at the shadow, which promptly dodged out of the way. Bai Xiaochun gave a cold harumph and looked down at the jade pendant. Not only could the pendant be used to control the gargoyle, it also contained descriptions of the various punishments and rewards that were usually used to train them. The most common method was to feed the gargoyle one's own blood, which would strengthen the connection and also improve the gargoyle's ability to understand orders. As the gargoyle grew, and its own cultivation base improved, it was also common to allow it to kill other things and drink their blood, which also would help the gargoyle grow stronger. The description also mentioned that if the gargoyle showed any signs of misbehaving, it was important to crush such behavior as quickly as possible. Attempts at rebellion would only grow more intense until the gargoyle became impossible to control. "You trifling, newborn gargoyle," he said angrily. "How dare you try to bite the hand that feeds you?" With that, he used the jade pendant to lock the gargoyle in place, then walked over and kicked him a few times. The gargoyle's mist faded even more, until only a bit was left, whereupon he began letting out plaintive shrieks. "You remember this," Bai Xiaochun said sternly. "I'm the top dog here. If you dare to provoke me, I won't hesitate to put you in your place. HMPH. Now, what should we call you? How about Shadow?" After giving him a name, he ignored him, and focused on the medicine formula that the blood master of Nameless Peak had given him. "Undying blood pill," he murmured thoughtfully. He had heard of this pill before. It had been created years ago by a patriarch who had gained enlightenment of the holy pill wall fragment. It had come to be one of the most useful spirit medicines in the entire bloodstream sect. Not only could it lead to spectacular results when raising gargoyles, it could help with refining corpses, as well as with the body refinement techniques of lesser Marsh Peak. Because it had so many varied uses, the undying blood pill had been in high demand in the sect from the moment it was first invented. Unfortunately, it was very difficult to concoct. The Tier 3 version was relatively easy, but the Tier 4 version wasn't easy at all. When it came to Tier 5 undying blood pills, they were far beyond the ordinary, and could be used to summon some of the deepest reserve powers available in the bloodstream sect. Even Tier 4 versions could be used to try to awaken some of the most ancient gargoyles. The more Bai Xiaochun studied the medicine formula, the more shocked he was. It required 97 types of medicinal plants, each one of which contained numerous transformations that had to be suppressed with Heavenspan River water. It even needed spirit blood from the enormous hand. Only after all of that could the undying blood pill be produced. Even the slightest mistake in the ratios of the medicinal plants will result in a failure. Furthermore, when it comes to combining the plants, some aspects of the connections need to be neutralized, whereas some aspects need to be fused together. The result is that 9 different streams of blood chi will be created. One stream of blood chi is a Tier 1 version, and so on. The Nameless Peak Bloodmaster wants me to concoct a Tier 4 undying blood pill, which would contain 4 streams of blood chi. Bai Xiaochun's eyes glittered as he continued to study the formula. As he did, his admiration for the person who had created it grew and grew. No wonder this pill is so difficult to concoct. One stream of blood qi is a simple matter, but even just two requires vast amounts of augury and other calculations, along with incredible skill in the Tao of medicine. Working with 3 streams of blood qi is even more complicated, about 10 times more so than 2 streams. And then 4 streams. That's almost ridiculous. Clearly, the only way to succeed is to use the all-creation plants and vegetation technique to simplify matters. Bai Xiaochun's eyes shone with a strange light. Obviously, concocting the undying blood pill in the usual fashion was far too difficult. The only option was to do things backwards. Having reached this point in his train of thought, Bai Xiaochun pulled out a pill furnace and some medicinal plants, and started to familiarize himself with the concoction process. Instead of trying to succeed the first time around, he decided to do a bit of testing first. Time passed. Before long, half a month had gone by. Bai Xiaochun never stepped out of the immortals' cave even once. He was completely immersed in his medicine concocting. He would concoct multiple batches per day, and whenever he ran out of bloodflame stones, he would simply ask for more. It was the same with medicinal plants. It got to the point where medicinal plants were being sent over every day. Thankfully, the mountain peak had deep reserves. Bai Xiaochun became more and more familiar with the undying blood pill, and yet, as he did, he ruined one batch of spirit medicine after another. In the past, he would have simply discarded such ruined spirit medicine, but this time, he hesitated and looked over at the cowering gargoyle over in the corner. I wonder if gargoyles eat spirit medicine? They're ruined, but they still have some power left in them. After some thought, he tossed one of the pills over to the gargoyle. Eat it, he said, looking on in anticipation. The gargoyle's intelligence was only starting to develop, but he understood what was being said, and pounced on the medicinal pill. Within a moment, the pill had turned into black smoke which the gargoyle quickly absorbed. Wow, he does eat them. Bai Xiaochun was quite pleased. From then on, he tossed all of the ruined pills over to the gargoyle. After absorbing the smoke from each pill, the gargoyle would burp loudly, and then laze off to the side with an intoxicated look on his face. Eventually, he would fall asleep. Ha ha ha, so smart of me. These ruined pills have a use after all. After ensuring that the gargoyle wasn't suffering any ill side effects, he felt more than ever that he'd done something great. With that, he continued to concoct pills, looking over at the gargoyle every once in a while and tossing him a ruined pill. He wasn't stingy at all. Time passed. Gradually, another half a month went by. During that time, Bai Xiaochun concocted many batches of pills, but every single one was a failure. Although he had gained enlightenment of the all-creation plants and vegetation technique, he wasn't familiar enough with it to use it consistently. Problems continued to crop up. However, Bai Xiaochun always came up with ways to overcome such problems. Furthermore, he didn't waste any of the ruined pills, but instead, fed them all to the gargoyle. I don't have anything else to give you, just these ruined pills. Bai Xiaochun was actually quite pleased with the situation. Cultivators couldn't consume ruined pills, but they seemed harmless to gargoyles. In fact, the gargoyle had grown quite a bit in the last month. Instead of looking like a tiny imp, he was now about as large as a 7 or 8-year-old child. Of course, he was pitch black, and surrounded by pulsing black mist. Most noteworthy of all was that the gargoyle seemed a lot more intelligent already. Instead of being completely useless, he was now able to assist Bai Xiaochun a bit when given simple orders. There were a few times when he seemed reluctant to consume the ruined pills, and yet he didn't dare to defy Bai Xiaochun's orders. On one occasion, Bai Xiaochun made a mistake, and could tell that the pill furnace was about to explode. He immediately backed up and called out, "You handle it, Shadow." Shadow raced over and passed through the outside of the pill furnace. Once inside, he took a deep breath, absorbing all of the spirit medicine. Afterward, he lay down on the ground off to the side, twitching, a glazed look in his eyes. Bai Xiaochun made a clicking sound with his tongue, very impressed by the gargoyle's behavior. Not bad, Shadow, not bad. Excited, he continued with his concocting. At one point, the pill furnace began to emit pulsing black smoke, which Bai Xiaochun knew would cause some sort of disaster, either acid rain, diarrhea, hallucinations, or something else. Yet again, he called upon Shadow. "You handle it, Shadow." Shadow pounced, breathing in deeply and sucking away all of the smoke. Then he lay off to the side while the smoke wreaked havoc on his insides. If he had saliva, he would definitely have been frothing at the mouth. Bai Xiaochun was moved. "Great job, Shadow. You're awesome." Bai Xiaochun was very excited, and had already determined that he needed to bring Shadow with him whenever he concocted medicine. Shadow was truly outstanding. Whether it was ruined pills, noxious smoke, or exploding pill furnaces, he could solve all of the problems that cropped up when dealing with the impurities in the pills. Bai Xiaochun was so immersed in his medicine concocting that he didn't notice the rising spark of intelligence in Little Shadow's eyes. That was apparently a result of consuming all of the impurities. Normally, he kept it well hidden, and always tried to seem dazed and foolish in front of Bai Xiaochun. At one point, Bai Xiaochun eyed a failed batch that had resulted in a mystery pill. He had no idea what the pill did, and was just about to put it into his bag of holding, when he looked over at Shadow. Blinking, he said, "You handle it, Shadow." A tremor ran through Shadow, but then he flew over and took the pill. After consuming it, he flopped over onto his side. Bai Xiaochun's eyes went wide. Just when he was going to go over to examine Shadow closer, Shadow suddenly leapt to his feet, howling as he transformed into a mist. Screaming, he burst out of the Immortals' cave. Bai Xiaochun hurried out after him to find that the gargoyle had seemingly gone mad. He was running around, jumping up and down, sometimes collapsing into a shapeless mist, other times coalescing back into form. After a bit of time, he once again collapsed on the ground. From that moment on, whenever he looked at Bai Xiaochun, profound fear could be seen mixed in with the intelligence in his eyes. Things progressed like that for about half a month. Bai Xiaochun worked hard, and the Tier 4 undying blood pill slowly began to take form. He was already able to make pills with 3 streams of blood qi, and was on the very cusp of being able to produce 4. During that time, Shadow continued to consume medicinal pills. Although the quality of the pills improved, they were still ruined pills, and occasionally even toxic, but Shadow generally enjoyed them all. Shadow also enjoyed leaving the Immortals' cave occasionally and flying around above Nameless Peak. When he encountered other gargoyles belonging to other cultivators, it was clear that Shadow's murderous aura was much less pronounced than theirs. The law of the jungle prevailed in the Bloodstream sect, and it was even more brutal when it came to life among the gargoyles. The cultivators had to strictly control the gargoyles under their control, lest major issues crop up. However, there was something strange about Shadow. He got along with all of the other gargoyles on Nameless Peak, and never got into fights with them. Bai Xiaochun was quite surprised about that, but didn't put too much thought into it. He focused on concocting medicine. Another half a month passed, and he finally made a breakthrough and concocted a Tier 4 undying blood pill. When the 4 streams of blood qi finally combined, Bai Xiaochun began to laugh at the top of his lungs. Of course, his excitement came not from the fact that he had concocted the Tier 4 undying blood pill, but rather because nobody had been affected during the concocting process. There had been no acid rain, no exploding furnaces, no toxic smoke, no diarrhea, nothing. Most exciting of all was that Bai Xiaochun finally felt as if he understood what it was like to be a Grandmaster Apothecary. Ha ha ha, now people definitely can't call me Plague Devil. I concocted medicine for Nameless Peak, and not a single problem cropped up. Of course, he was just as surprised as he was happy. Also surprised were all the other cultivators in the Bloodstream sect, especially those on Nameless Peak. Although they were still a bit leery, there didn't seem to be any signs of disasters. Apparently, Nightcrypt's medicine concocting truly had proceeded in complete safety. Has Plague Devil really changed his ways? I can't believe that nothing happened during his medicine concocting. There was one thing that happened which no one noticed, however. Bai Xiaochun's gargoyle Shadow had been making the rounds on Nameless Peak, getting to know all of the gargoyles there. The Blood Master and Grand Elder of Nameless Peak were delighted that the Tier 4 undying blood pill had been successfully concocted. Just as they'd promised, they provided generous compensation, along with a ceremony filled with pomp and splendor. They even decided that they would work more with Nightcrypt in the future. Although the ceremony was held on Nameless Peak, Grand Elder Song Junwan was invited to attend. It was held in Nameless Peak's Bloodmaster Temple, where Nightcrypt was lavished with endless praise. Bai Xiaochun felt that it wasn't the time to call attention to himself, so he simply stuck his chin up and smiled coolly. Off to the side, Song Junwan watched the proceedings with a smile, and whenever she looked at Nightcrypt, her eyes would shine. Before long, the ceremony had been going for about an hour. At that point, Nameless Peak's Blood Master laughed loudly and walked over to Nightcrypt. Junior brother Nightcrypt, you are a real genius in the Tao of medicine, a true rarity in the world. In the future, your name is sure to rock the entire Eastern cultivation world. If you ever concoct a Tier 5 undying blood pill, you will surely shake the entire sect. I'm sure that day isn't very far off. Nameless Peak's Grand Elder then chimed in, anyone who concocts a Tier 5 undying blood pill will receive a big reward from the sect, and will be credited as having performed a major service. As everyone clustered around Bai Xiaochun, chatting and laughing, he listened to their words with great pleasure. Just when he was about to do a bit of bragging, a deafening boom could be heard from outside. It was like thunder from heaven, and came so suddenly that everyone was startled. All of Nameless Peak shook violently, and cracks even appeared in the ground. There was also a blast of heat that swept over everything. The entire crowd in Nameless Peak's Bloodmaster Temple looked out the door, their faces flickering with shock. Outside, the sky had turned gray, and everything was still shaking. It wasn't Nameless Peak alone, Corpse Peak and Middle Peak were also physically rocking back and forth. The inner sect district was thrown into complete chaos, as was the outer sect district. People were screaming and shouting, and almost immediately, beams of light could be seen as people flew up into the air. Even the Bloodstream sect's grand spell formation activated. What just happened? Don't tell me someone is attacking the Bloodstream sect. The war's starting. Even Ancestor Peak was completely shaken. As the blast of heat passed over it, the shocked Prime Elders sent Divine Sense out to scan the entire sect. Bai Xiaochun's face fell as he raced out of Bloodmaster Temple along with everyone else. The entire group was shaken, and as for Bai Xiaochun, he was panting. Moments later, he was outside. Song Junwan took her place by his side, looking around vigilantly. Cultivators were flying up from all of the other mountain peaks, looks of shock on their faces. Before long, all gazes shifted in the direction of Lesser Marsh Peak. Clouds of shocking black smoke were pouring up into the air from that direction. The source of the smoke was a location right between the lower and upper finger, where massive fissures spread out in all directions from a huge hole. Because of the belching black smoke, everyone soon realized where that huge boom had originated. Lesser Marsh Peak? What happened over there? Bai Xiaochun squinted his eyes as he looked over at the masses of black smoke. After a moment, his eyes went wide, and his heart began to pound. The big boom from moments ago had somehow seemed vaguely familiar, and after taking a look at the source of the black smoke, he realized that it was where he had been concocting medicine on Lesser Marsh Peak. Clearly, the sound from moments ago had come from an exploding pill furnace. In that moment, he suddenly recalled that he had left a batch of medicinal pills brewing on Lesser Marsh Peak. Beads of sweat appeared on his forehead, and his heart began to pound even harder. That was when the wails of anguish began to rise up from Lesser Marsh Peak, and Bai Xiaochun's scalp began to tingle. I'm finished. Kaput. Even as Bai Xiaochun began to tremble in fear, and the rest of the Bloodstream sect looked on in shock, several beams of light flew out from Lesser Marsh Peak. In the lead was the Lesser Marsh Peak Bloodmaster. He was shaking visibly, and his eyes were bloodshot. As he looked down at the chaos on Lesser Marsh Peak, he seemed like he wanted to cry. After a moment, he threw his head back and let out a howl of grief. He knew that everything that was happening was because of Nightcrypt. With that, he prepared to call out by name the person who was at fault, then, to track him down and kill him. However, before the name, Nightcrypt, could escape his lips, Bai Xiaochun took action. Forcing his eyes to instantly become bloodshot, he strode forward toward the Lesser Marsh Peak Bloodmaster and shouted out in a voice that could shake heaven and earth. My treasured pill. Beating his chest with his fists and tugging at his hair, he howled like a lunatic as he then shot at top speed toward Lesser Marsh Peak. Why is this happening? Dear heavens! What happened? My treasured pill. He seemed to be going mad as he flew in a beam of light toward the source of the smoke on Lesser Marsh Peak, which was the center of all the chaos. Lesser Marsh Peak was now completely scorched black, and more than half of the buildings and Immortals' caves were completely destroyed. The cultivators all seemed to be in very bad shape, and flames of rage burned in their eyes. However, as soon as they saw Bai Xiaochun, expressions of fear filled their faces. Bai Xiaochun ignored them as he raced in the direction of where he had been concocting medicine on Lesser Marsh Peak. The entire area was a crater. There was no spell formation, no Immortals' cave. The only things left behind were the shattered chunks of the pill furnace and intense heat. In the air above the mountain peak were the Bloodmaster, the Grand Elder, and the Bloodstreak Elders. Many of them had blood oozing out of their mouths, and all of them looked astonished. The entire lot had been aware that Nightcrypt could be annoying, but none of them could ever have imagined that he could produce tragic results like this. Nightcrypt, growled the Bloodmaster, a shocking level of killing intent burning in his eyes as he flew toward Bai Xiaochun. In the same moment that the Bloodmaster started moving toward him, Bai Xiaochun began to tremble. Spinning around, he howled madly, Lesser Marsh Peak Bloodmaster. I spent 3 months on that treasured pill. I poured my own blood, sweat, and tears into it. It was almost a Tier 5 medicine. Bai Xiaochun's face was twisted as if with grief and madness, and an increasingly murderous aura was building up around him. Damn it, Bloodmaster, didn't you tell me that pill furnace couldn't explode? Didn't you tell me it was a precious treasure? Why did you lie to me? Bai Xiaochun seemed insane, even more maddened than the lesser Marsh Peak Bloodmaster. At first, it seemed like he was simply making wild accusations in his madness. The lesser Marsh Peak Bloodmaster was incensed, but after he began to speak, realized there was little that he could say. Why did you lie to me? All of my hard work, all of my effort concocting that pill, was based on a lie. You said it was a precious treasure taken from the Pillstream sect, that it wouldn't explode under any circumstances. If you had told me ahead of time that the pill furnace could blow up, then I would never have wasted so many precious medicinal plants. I could have just used ordinary concocting methods. Oh, my treasured pill. Do you know how much of my own blood, sweat and tears I poured into this treasured pill? Bai Xiaochun shouted hoarsely. Damn it, why didn't you tell me the truth instead of lying to me? Crowds of Bloodstream sect cultivators were converging on the scene to watch, and the streams of divine sense from Ancestor Peak were focused on the area. I told you not to get close to the pill furnace. Tell me, did you get close? Did you? Bai Xiaochun finally began to chuckle bitterly, his face a mask of disappointment and sadness. There was no way for the lesser Marsh Peak Bloodmaster and Grand Elder to offer a retort to Bai Xiaochun's words. The Bloodmaster truly had told Bai Xiaochun that the pill furnace couldn't explode, and had also promised to take responsibility for any situations which arose. Bai Xiaochun's last words hit especially close to home. The truth was that because the heat radiating from the pill furnace had continued to increase, slowly scorching everything on Lesser Marsh Peak, they actually had felt they had no other choice than to approach the furnace to take a look. They were in the wrong, and yet, the losses sustained by Lesser Marsh Peak were so vast that they couldn't restrain their rage. The Bloodmaster gritted his teeth and said, You jabbering troublemaker. Lesser Marsh Peak trusted you. We asked you to concoct medicine for us, and if you had, I would have taken responsibility. But I don't see any spirit medicine. You destroyed Lesser Marsh Peak, Night Crypt. I demand an explanation. Snorting coldly, the Bloodmaster took a step forward as if to grab Bai Xiaochun, and hopefully gain something from this disaster. Hold on, Bai Xiaochun said. Looking very serious, he took a step forward and breathed in deeply through his nose. Something's off here. That smell. Do you sense that medicinal aroma? The lesser Marsh Peak Bloodmaster frowned. Snorting coldly, he proceeded toward Bai Xiaochun, but even as he did, Bai Xiaochun flickered into motion, appearing a moment later next to a chunk that had once made up the wall of the pill furnace. Looking shaken and incredulous, he pulled the chunk off to the side, revealing a medicinal pill underneath, which glowed with five-colored light. It also emanated a strong medicinal aroma which, combined with the five-colored light, caused the eyes of everyone who could see it to go wide. Their minds began to spin, and many people even gasped or cried out in shock. Is that a Tier 5 spirit medicine? I've never even seen a Tier 5 spirit medicine before. Even the Pillstream sect only has a few people who can concoct them. Tier 5 spirit medicines are all priceless treasures. A five-colored glow is one of the signs that appears when a Tier 5 spirit medicine is concocted. Heavens! I can't believe it's actually a Tier 5 spirit medicine. As the crowd erupted into pandemonium, Bai Xiaochun mustered his courage, reached out, and grabbed the pill. He had never imagined that he would end up concocting a Tier 5 spirit medicine, and wanted to simply take it and run. However, with so many people present, that wasn't possible. Bai Xiaochun wasn't the only shocked one. The lesser Marsh Peak Bloodmaster stood off to the side, along with the Grand Elder and Bloodstreak Elders, and all of them were gasping. When he saw Bai Xiaochun pick up the spirit medicine, the Bloodmaster suddenly started laughing good-naturedly, and his murderous aura vanished. A misunderstanding, that's all. A misunderstanding. Ha ha ha. I was pulling your leg just now, Grandmaster Nightcrypt. The Bloodmaster hurried forward, his face filled with a sincere smile. Bai Xiaochun snorted coldly. However, he couldn't think of anything to say in response, and was already racking his brains as he tried to figure out what to do next. How about this, Grandmaster Nightcrypt? Lesser Marsh Peak would like to triple our previous offer of compensation. The Bloodmaster, the Grand Elder, and the Bloodstreak Elders all hurried forward to cluster around Bai Xiaochun. That was when Song Junwan, who had been standing off to the side the entire time, stepped forward and coolly said, How dare you threaten one of my middle peak cultivators right in front of me? The hearts of the elders began to pound, and an extremely unsightly expression appeared on the Bloodmaster's face. As the two parties faced off, an ancient voice suddenly rumbled out from Ancestor Peak. Nightcrypt has concocted a Tier 5 spirit medicine and is a true chosen of the Bloodstream sect. Let him be appointed as a Bloodstreak Elder of Middle Peak. At the same time, a blurry figure appeared in midair, an old man wearing a blood-colored robe. The incredible pressure radiating off of him caused everyone in the area to feel shaken, and they spontaneously bowed their heads and clasped hands in formal greetings. Regarding the pill, it belongs to Lesser Marsh Peak. However, Lesser Marsh Peak shall prepare the materials necessary, and personally craft the Bloodstreak battle robe for Nightcrypt. That old man was none other than the Song clan patriarch. As soon as Bai Xiaochun realized who he was, he took a deep breath, then clasped hands and bowed. No one would dare to defy the orders of the Song clan patriarch. However, the Song clan patriarch wasn't finished speaking. His placid voice continued to echo out through the sect. It's good that everyone is gathered here, as I have 3 important announcements to make. First, in 8 days, the cultivators of the 4 mountain peaks will all sacrifice some of their blood chi to summon the Bloodstream sect's Grand Lich. Second, in a month, the trial by fire for the position of Middle Peak Bloodmaster will begin. Third, we will be going to war soon. As the Song clan patriarch looked around at the gathered cultivators, gasps could be heard, and murderous auras began to build up. War, war. Everyone began howling at the tops of their lungs, causing the entire Bloodstream sect to shake. Although Bai Xiaochun was yelling just like everyone else in the crowd, he was actually feeling very anxious inside. Very well, you're all dismissed. The Song clan patriarch looked at Nightcrypt, smiled, and then turned and vanished. Excited at the prospect of the coming war, everyone returned to their various mountain peaks. Although Bai Xiaochun was reluctant to give up the Tier 5 spirit medicine, he had no choice but to hand it over to the Lesser Marsh Peak Bloodmaster. Then, he left with Song Junwan to go back to Middle Peak. Song Junwan didn't say much on the way back to Middle Peak, but her eyes flashed with cold light. As for Bai Xiaochun, he was wrapped up in his own thoughts, and didn't feel like saying anything either. When they finally arrived, Song Junwan looked over at him and said, Nightcrypt, in the trial by fire for the position of Middle Peak Bloodmaster, I want you to stand as Dharma Protector for me, to help me win the title. The trial by fire will be dangerous, so you don't need to give me an answer right now. I'll be going into secluded meditation to prepare. You can inform me of your decision after I come out. She gave him a deep look and then headed toward the upper finger. Bai Xiaochun watched her leave, complex feelings twisting his heart. Eventually, he found himself back in his immortals cave, sitting there cross-legged, more worried than ever. Based on what the Song clan patriarch had just said, Bai Xiaochun realized that all of the discussion amongst the Bloodstream sect patriarchs had led to a decision. The war with the Spirit Stream sect would happen, and in only a few months. The next 7 days passed relatively uneventfully. Early in the morning of the 8th day, the sound of tolling bells filled the Bloodstream sect. Bai Xiaochun took a deep breath and strode out of his immortals cave to find that virtually all of the Foundation establishment cultivators from the 4 mountain peaks were flying through the air toward the upper fingers of each of their respective mountains. Then, 8 figures appeared, flying out from Ancestor Peak. They were like giants that caused rumbling sounds to fill the area, and shone with dazzling light that made it impossible to see anything more than their outlines. As soon as those 8 figures appeared, the cultivators all dropped to their knees to kowtow. Greetings, patriarchs. Bai Xiaochun was immediately shaken. Those 8 figures were none other than the 8 patriarchs of the Bloodstream sect. Patriarch Limitless and the Song clan patriarch were among them. There was another among the group who wore a violet robe. He seemed to surpass all of the other patriarchs as he hovered there in midair like a brilliantly shining sun. Intense pressure immediately weighed down on the entire area. Everyone, release your blood chi, open the blood portal. The voice rang out to fill the entire hand that the Bloodstream sect rested on, shaking everything as a huge spell formation appeared. Blood chi exploded out, starting from Lesser Marsh Peak. As the blood chi streamed from the tip of the finger, it formed a blood-colored pillar of light that shot up into the sky. Next, the same thing happened on Nameless Peak, Middle Peak, Corpse Peak, and finally, Ancestor Peak. Rumble. 5 beams of blood-colored light shot up, staining the entire sky the color of blood, and creating an enormous vortex. The cultivators of the Bloodstream sect were shaken, and could feel their blood chi seething as they unleashed the power of their cultivation bases. At that point, one of the patriarchs stepped forward, a middle-aged man who was strikingly handsome. There was something entrancing about him that made anyone who looked at him want to admire and trust him. I am Drought Flame, and I will take the lead in summoning the reserve powers of the Bloodstream sect. I need the help of 9 disciples to help refine the chi and blood. Xu Zhaoshan, Song Ke, Shui Mei, Han Dong, Zhou Zhengfeng. Although he was speaking in a calm tone, he was a patriarch, which caused even ordinary words spoken by him to carry vast pressure. Every time he called out a name, that person would fly up into the air to stand in front of him. Soon, 8 individuals had been called forth, and the sight of the assembled group caused the other bloodstream sect disciples to gasp. Every single one of the group of 8 were Earthstring Foundation establishment cultivators with the power of multiple tide flows. All of them were top chosen in the bloodstream sect. Then, Patriarch Droughtflame's eyes came to rest on Middle Peak, and he uttered the last of the 9 names. Nightcrypt. Although Bai Xiaochun was a bit taken aback, he quickly put a somber expression on his face and made sure his murderous aura was on full display. Then he shot up into the air to appear in front of Patriarch Droughtflame along with the other 8. Not a single bloodstream sect disciple was shocked that Nightcrypt would be part of the group. In fact, for Patriarch Droughtflame to call him out was exactly what many people had expected would happen. Not a single person even felt like commenting on the matter. Obviously, Plague Devil was one of the most famous people in the bloodstream sect, and everyone recognized that he was a powerful chosen. Not only did the crowds of disciples on the mountain peaks feel that way, Song Ke and the other chosen didn't dispute his qualifications at all, although brutal gleams did appear in their eyes. Bai Xiaochun had already been in the bloodstream sect for a few years now. To mortals, that might be considered quite a while, but for cultivators, that amount of time would flash by very quickly. Even still, it couldn't be considered a very short period of time. Bai Xiaochun had worked hard, and step by step, reached this day in which he was the focus of all attention, and had secured the approval of the entire sect. Bai Xiaochun could sense that fact, and although he had been prepared for this day to come, even he couldn't help but gasp inwardly at the status he had attained. It filled his heart with contentment and pride. HMMMMPHHH. Wherever Lord Bai goes, he ends up shining as brightly as the sun or moon. Who made me this outstanding? Although he felt wonderful inside, not a trace of those feelings showed on the outside. He looked as cold and dangerous as ever, with a powerful murderous aura that rivaled all of the other 8 chosen. The 8 patriarchs were all blurry and difficult to make out clearly, but when they looked at Nightcrypt, it was clear that they were nodding in approval. Some of the patriarchs even studied him more closely than the other chosen. The fact that a mortal Dao Foundation establishment cultivator could rise up in the fashion Nightcrypt had was so strange that some of the patriarchs had grown suspicious, and had secretly investigated him. However, because the mask he wore was a true precious treasure throughout the years, not a single clue had ever slipped out that might reveal his secret. Furthermore, his skill in the Tao of medicine was so important to the bloodstream sect that none of the patriarchs took their own suspicions too seriously. The 9 of you will sit in meditation in front of these blood altars, Patriarch Droughtflame said. He waved his hand, sending 9 beams of blood-colored light flying out, which transformed into 9 blood-colored altars. Transform Qi into blood to help me open the portal and summon the Grand Lich. Bai Xiaochun and the others all settled down in front of their respective blood altars. In truth, there was no need for special help from these 9 cultivators to summon the Grand Lich. However, after some discussion, the patriarchs had decided that because of the upcoming war, they should get a first-hand look at the power at the sect's disposal. Among the 8 patriarchs, Patriarch Droughtflame was the one most insistent on going to war, and therefore, he took charge of summoning the reserve powers of the sect, as well as looking over the 9 cultivators who were being tested in the process. His gaze seemed to contain intense pressure that left Bai Xiaochun shaken inwardly. It was almost as if he could see the secrets of everyone he looked at. Even the other 8 cultivators surrounding Bai Xiaochun averted their gazes humbly. Eventually, Patriarch Droughtflame looked away from them, turning his gaze up into the sky. He then lifted his right hand and waved it through the air. In response, the blood-colored beams of light shooting up from the 5 mountain peaks all rumbled and began to grow larger. Simultaneously, the blood-colored vortex grew larger, and in the very center of it, a huge blood-colored eye became visible. As the eye opened, the sky dimmed, and a massive wind kicked up. Intense pressure filled the world, and a blood mist spread out in all directions. All of the bloodstream sect disciples down below were shaken, and prostrated themselves toward the eye. Look up, and see the power which lets the bloodstream sect dominate the other 3 sects. Patriarch Droughtflame's voice seemed to contain a bizarre power that forced everyone who heard it to look up into the blood eye in the sky. Bai Xiaochun was deeply shaken. However, it was at that point that his undying live forever technique stirred, and gradually seemed to form a resonance with the blood eye. Song Ke, Shui Mei and the others were all mentally shaken, and yet none of them dared to look down. They forced their heads up to look at the blood eye in the vortex above. Many people cried out in shock. Even Song Ke and the other chosen, despite their high position and deeper understanding of the secrets of the sect, couldn't help but gasp in astonishment. Bai Xiaochun's eyes went wide, and his mind felt like it was filled with crashing lightning. Within that blood-colored eye, just outside of the very pupil, were 4 shadowy figures, one of them being an enormous, violet-colored skeleton. The skeleton was covered with crackling lightning, as well as a swirling aura of death. Although it wasn't moving at all, it emanated a powerful pressure that left anyone who could see it completely shaken. Bai Xiaochun knew a bit about Corpse Peak, and based on that, he quickly came to the conclusion that this was a Grand Lich. On Corpse Peak, there was nothing more powerful than Grand Liches, which surpassed even Flying Ghouls. Flying Ghouls are comparable to core formation cultivators, but Grand Liches are like nascent soul patriarchs. The second blurry figure within the eye was a black mist that seemed to be filled with tens of millions of faces. All of those faces seemed to belong to old men, and radiated a powerful sensation of time. Within that mist was a gargoyle, and from the powerful pressure it radiated, it didn't seem to be any less powerful than the Grand Lich. The third shadowy figure was nothing more than a pile of dried-up skin that was so old it was impossible to determine its age. It radiated a terrifying aura that was even stronger than that of the Grand Lich or the gargoyle. Just looking at it filled one with a sense of wonderment. Many of the Bloodstream sect cultivators who saw it were left gasping. Shaken, Bai Xiaochun looked over at the fourth shadowy figure, which was actually a sword. It was a blood-colored sword, upon which sat a crimson imp. The imp had no hair on its head, and although it was only about as big as a person's hand, it radiated an intense murderous aura that surpassed the other 3 shadowy figures. Corpse Peak's Grand Lich, Nameless Peak's Million-Faced Gargoyle, Lesser Marsh Peak's Totem Canvas, Middle Peak's Ancestral Sword. These are the signature relics of the Bloodstream sect, and they are actually defending what exists in the pupil of the Blood Eye, another of the Blood Ancestors' powerful reserve forces. Behold the complete sacrificial Blood Dao formation. Patriarch Drought Flame waved his right hand, and the pupil in the Blood Eye began to expand to slowly reveal a 5th shadowy figure. Clearly, it was being protected by the 4 figures outside of the pupil. The sight of the precious 5th resource of the sect caused Bai Xiaochun to begin panting, and his eyes to widen as he slowly came to see. A scarecrow. It was bizarre in appearance, with a patch of human skin held in one hand, and a steelyard balance in the other. A monstrous smile covered its face that made it seem as if it were sneering at the world. When Bai Xiaochun looked into the scarecrow's eyes, that smile seemed to fill his entire heart and mind. Within moments, though, the Heaven Dao aura within Bai Xiaochun spread out, driving the image of the scarecrow out from inside of him. As he sat there panting in recovery, he noticed that Patriarch Drought Flame seemed to be looking at him with approval. The other 8 chosen around him were in all still in a daze. Shuimei was the next to recover, followed by Song Ke. One by one, they drove out the image from within their minds. These are the reserve powers of the Bloodstream sect, Patriarch Drought Flame said, speaking to the sect as a whole. Unleash your blood chi. As for the 9 of you chosen, begin the refinement process. Help me summon the Grand Lich. After summoning the Grand Lich, the other spirits will eventually awaken of their own volition. After they have all woken, the sacrificial Blood Dao formation can emerge from within the world of the Blood Eye. Immediately, the innumerable cultivators in the Bloodstream sect who were below the core formation stage all began to rotate their cultivation bases. Foundation establishment cultivators, inner sect disciples, outer sect disciples. Tens of thousands of cultivators all called upon the power of their cultivation bases to send blood chi streaming out. A blood mist formed, rising up into the air toward the 9 blood altars, into which it merged. Bai Xiaochun was seated in front of the 5th of the blood altars, and a tremor ran through him as the powerful blood chi began to merge into the altar, and through it, into him. Before he even had time to think about what was happening, his undying live forever technique sprang into operation, absorbing the blood chi. He looked around, and saw that Shuimei, Song Ke, and the others were all absorbing the blood chi. Apparently, they were using their own bodies as vessels, combined with a Bloodstream sect secret magic, they were transforming the chi into blood. Shuimei was the first to succeed. A drop of blood emerged from the top of her head and floated up to rest above her. Song Ke was next. Bai Xiaochun quickly followed suit, using his special undying blood refinement technique to transform the blood chi inside of him into a drop of blood, which then floated up out of the top of his head. Soon, blood had emerged from all 9 of the chosen. Time passed, and the drops of blood grew larger. After enough time had passed for an incense stick to burn, Shuimei's eyes snapped open. The blood above her head, which was already the size of a fist, flew over toward Patriarch Drought Flame. Patriarch Drought Flame's eyes flickered, and then he nodded his head slightly. The blood then transformed into a red beam of light that shot up toward the Grand Lich in the Blood Eye. A moment later, it touched the bones of the Lich, which caused it to shake slightly, and a faint aura of life force began to emanate out from it. 8 more drops of blood. Patriarch Drought Flame said coolly. As massive amounts of blood chi continued to pour into the blood altars, Bai Xiaochun looked on with a somber expression. However, inwardly, he was shaken. So much blood chi, he thought. Should I help myself to a bit of it? At first, Bai Xiaochun was a bit hesitant. He looked around at the other chosen in front of their blood altars and saw that, other than Shui Mei, who had already succeeded, everyone else was still working with the blood chi. After confirming the situation, Bai Xiaochun was actually starting to get a bit angry at the excessive actions of the others. Take Song Ke, for example. He had a foundation of 8 tide flows, and although it seemed reasonable that he would be slower than Shui Mei, he shouldn't be that much slower. However, he was clearly only about 70% finished. Everyone else was in a similar situation, with the slowest of the group being only 30% complete. Apparently I'm just too honest, he thought. I can't believe I'm still trying to figure out what to do, while those other jerks are already helping themselves to the blood chi to further their own cultivation. Feeling more righteous than ever, he looked over at Shui Mei and mused that she really was a fool. Apparently, her honesty was almost at the same level as his own. Whatever. I guess I'll just give in to the peer pressure. Since I'm undercover here, I don't want to do anything to stand out too much. I need to fit in, that's for sure. I really don't want to do this. Sighing inwardly, he took a deep breath, and then began to siphon away about 90% of the blood chi. Because of the suddenness of his action, the blood sphere above his head, which was already about half formed, suddenly withered. Although nobody down below noticed, Song Ke and the others did, and their eyes burned with rage as they cursed him inwardly. Patriarch Drought Flame hesitated for a moment, and gave Bai Xiaochun a closer look. Strange expressions could be seen on the faces of the other patriarchs. Actually, in addition to calling upon these 9 chosen to help summon the Grand Lich, the patriarchs had also intended for them to take advantage of the opportunity to increase their cultivation bases. As for exactly how much they could improve their cultivation bases while simultaneously not drawing too much attention, that would be up to each individual. Because Shui Mei was focused on becoming Bloodmaster, she disdained such actions, and the patriarchs ignored that. But then Night Crypt, despite being half finished, suddenly began to siphon away most of the blood chi for himself. If Night Crypt were the only one to do such a thing, it might not have mattered. However, a few moments later, Song Ke, Xu Zhaoshan, and the others all followed suit. The patriarchs couldn't allow such a thing to go on. After all, an underworldly fire had begun to burn around the Grand Lich in the Blood Eye. Whoever delays the summoning of the Grand Lich by not completing their blood sphere in the time it takes an incense stick to burn will be personally transformed into a lich by me. The Song clan patriarch snorted coldly and then spoke out in a voice that could only be heard by Bai Xiaochun and the others. Bai Xiaochun's heart trembled. The blood chi he had just absorbed had already helped him significantly. His undying heavenly king had already climbed up to the power of 5 ghosts. So stingy, he muttered to himself. However, he didn't dare to defy the patriarchs, and immediately restrained himself. Everyone else bowed their heads, and soon, the allotted deadline approached. By this point, Bai Xiaochun and the others all had blood spheres that were about 90% complete. The final 10% would require full concentration all the way down to the last second. After all, no one wanted to complete their spheres early. The best thing to do was wait until the last possible moment, and thus take advantage of the unbelievable opportunity that had been presented to further their cultivation with the help of the entire bloodstream sect. In the short amount of time it takes an incense stick to burn, Bai Xiaochun's undying heavenly king made another breakthrough. His fleshly body power now was equivalent to 6 berserk ghosts. He was tingling all over, and had to resist the urge to look up and howl at the top of his lungs. Can't keep this up, unfortunately. Time's almost up. Although he was reluctant to stop, there was nothing else to do. Sighing inwardly, he was just about to take advantage of the final few dozen breaths of time to complete the blood sphere when suddenly his heart thumped. I wonder, if I put a bit of my own undying blood into the mix, would I be able to control the Grand Lich? The thought excited him, and if it actually worked, could be considered an incredible service for the Spirit Stream sect. But then he thought about how well the Bloodstream sect had treated him, and was torn. Song Junwan, the Song clan patriarch, as well as the other Grand Elders, have all treated me pretty well. Although they're a bit brutal, overall, they're not bad. Sighing, he also considered the fact that with his current cultivation base, it didn't seem very likely that he would be able to control a Grand Lich. And yet, he still couldn't make a decision. Well, I might as well try. Whether I succeed or not will be up to the will of the heavens. Bai Xiaochun's eyes flickered, and he looked down. As everyone continued to transform the qi into blood, he did the same. And yet, he also extracted a bit of blood qi from his undying blood, and mixed it into the blood qi being provided by everyone else. A few dozen breaths of time passed, and Patriarch Droughtflame's eyes flickered as he announced that the process was now ending. At that point, a blood sphere flew over from Song Ke, Xu Zhaoshan, and everyone else. Bai Xiaochun nervously opened his eyes as his blood sphere also flew over. His blood sphere looked exactly like everyone else's but also contained some authentic undying blood within it. They shouldn't notice, he thought. After all, my undying blood is true and authentic. Any other kind of undying blood is only a replica. Even if they do notice, they'll just think it's because I'm stronger than everyone else. After all, I did perform an inverse blood ancestral awakening. As the 8 blood spheres flew over, Patriarch Droughtflame studied them briefly, then waved his hand, sending them flying up to the Grand Lich in the Blood Eye. Bai Xiaochun breathed a sigh of relief as the blood spheres merged into the Grand Lich. Moments later, a powerful life force erupted out, and the underworldly fire in the Grand Lich's eyes began to burn even more brightly than before. Then, the Grand Lich slowly rose to its feet, threw his head back and roared. That roar shook heaven and earth, and caused all light to dim as a shocking energy radiated out. A gale force wind sprang up, sweeping across everything, casting everything into murky darkness. As the Grand Lich awoke, the million-faced gargoyle, the withered patch of skin, and the blood sword all trembled. Apparently, they were now heading toward the point of awakening. Cracking sounds echoed out in all directions as fissures began to fill the pupil of the Blood Eye, as if a magical seal were being broken. Before Bai Xiaochun had time to assess whether or not his idea had worked, Patriarch Droughtflame waved his sleeve, as did all of the other patriarchs. Eyes glittering, they all flew toward the Blood Eye. The last to reach it was the Song clan patriarch. Turning to look at everyone down below, he said, "In a month, the trial by fire for the position of Middle Peak Bloodmaster will begin." Even as his thunderous voice continued to echo back and forth through the sect, he stepped into the Blood Eye. In that instant, the million-faced gargoyle awoke. The patch of withered skin suddenly began to radiate life force, and the imp on the blood sword opened its eyes. At the same time, more and more fissures spread out over the pupil, and it began to collapse. It was as if a door were being opened, that the 8 patriarchs of the Bloodstream sect were now entering. Rumble. The sky suddenly seemed to fade, and the Blood Eye vanished. Down below, the cultivators of the Bloodstream sect looked up from their meditation. The sect leader and the Grand Elders then dismissed the crowds. However, many questions remained in the minds of all present. They had all seen the reserve powers and yet, were unsure why the patriarchs had entered the Blood Eye. For some reason, no matter how they considered the matter, they couldn't help but assume it had something to do with the war. Bai Xiaochun was more nervous than ever. In the end, he'd been unable to determine whether or not his idea had worked. He pondered the matter as he headed back to his immortals cave, where he stabilized the increase in power of his fleshly body. In the blink of an eye, nearly an entire month passed. Soon, it was only 3 days before the appointed day mentioned by the Song clan patriarch, the trial by fire for the position of Middle Peak Bloodmaster. By that point, everyone in the Bloodstream sect was talking about the trial by fire. Every generation of the Bloodstream sect always had 4 Bloodmasters, who would eventually become Bloodrippers, a position higher than the Prime Elder. In this generation, the Middle Peak Bloodmaster was the last spot that needed to be filled. Now that war was looming on the horizon, the trial by fire would finally be held to select the individual to become Bloodmaster. After the Bloodmaster was selected, the battle prowess of Middle Peak as a whole would be increased. It was an important matter for the entire Bloodstream sect, and even more so for the cultivators from Middle Peak. After all, in theory, any Foundation establishment cultivator from Middle Peak could eventually become Bloodmaster. Of course, it was common knowledge that this generation's Bloodmaster would be one of 2 people. Either it would be Shui Mei, or it would be Grand Elder Song Junwan. Discussions raged as the trial by fire neared. It will definitely be young lady Shui Mei. She's at the peak of Earthstring Foundation establishment with 9 tide flows. If she doesn't become Bloodmaster, that would be a big loss for us here on Middle Peak. I think the Grand Elder also has a good chance of succeeding. After all, she's in the great circle of Foundation establishment. Shuimei might be at the peak of Earthstring Foundation establishment, but that's still only mid-foundation establishment. She's not quite on the same level as the Grand Elder. The Bloodmaster trial by fire doesn't just come down to cultivation base power. There are other factors, such as the strength of the Dharma protectors they bring along. The night before the trial by fire was to begin, Bai Xiaochun was meditating in his immortals cave, when suddenly, Grand Elder Song Junwan appeared outside. She was cloaked in moonlight as she came to stand outside the door, and when she smiled, she looked more beautiful than ever. Junior brother Nightcrypt, are you well rested? She asked softly. Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.